Yes, you've been looking in some depth at this latest bizarre situation with the use of that heavy sedative drug,
Ketamine.
ketamine.
Yeah.
There's a great movie, Armageddon. America has to send up some people to blow up an asteroid that's coming in to destroy the country. And it turns out that our astronauts are just not equipped to go and drill on this asteroid. And so they go to Bruce Willis's mining crew. And one of the men in his crew is this giant guy who's really just huge, and he's sort of a wild guy, as many of these miners are who are digging around the world under Bruce Willis, at least. And one of the things that they find, this man can't go into space. He's taking a horse pill, a horse sedative, ketamine.
Fail, impressively failed. One toxicology analysis revealed ketamine. That is a very powerful sedative.
Sedatives are used all the time, Doctor.
Well, this one's used on horses.
Some of these guys are pretty big.
And Bruce says, well, he's a big guy. He's a big guy. And it's so funny. My colleagues now are pushing ketamine for depression. Tell us that crazy story.
Yeah, so I mean, this is fascinating, and again starts in your crazy country. So some people started opening clinics and giving people injections of IV ketamine. Sometimes this was done in a sort of psychotherapeutic way, with the idea that you'd have this sort of mind-altered experience. You'd do it in conjunction with a therapist. I think ecstasy and LSD are also being used in this way, and that maybe that would, enable people to deal with, past trauma or get over some anxiety. So that was the way it started, and then ketamine clinics start up where people go back and they keep getting regular sort of fixes. So that became popular. Then Janssen developed an inhaled, a nasal inhalation version of ketamine, which is called S-ketamine, but it's just as strong as ketamine, in fact. And people, and the process with that is that you go in and you inhale your S-ketamine 3 times a week, and then you're observed afterwards to make sure that you're you're not physically in danger in any way, and then you're let out of the clinic, and then you come back again. So esketamine was recently licensed by the FDA for this 3-weekly mode of administration, and has just been considered by the European Medicines Agency and the UK Medicines Agency. So normally the FDA has to have 2 positive trials, but of the 3 trials of acute treatment for treatment-resistant depression it's being marketed for, of those 3 trials, only 1 was positive. The other 2 weren't positive at all. So then they roped in a relapse prevention study, and they found some positive findings in that. So then they said, okay, we've got our 2 studies, although they don't usually use a relapse prevention study. So they licensed it on the basis of this 1 positive acute treatment study and this relapse prevention study. What they failed to say, they skated over the fact that 2 of the studies were negative. They also failed to highlight that there was a huge placebo response across all the studies. Obviously, if you're getting people in, to do the slightly odd procedure and then giving people lots of attention and care afterwards, there's going to be a placebo effect. And most worrying of all, what they skated over was that actually there were a lot of potential worrying effects associated with the esketamine. So there were several deaths in the esketamine group, none in the placebo group.
That's very I didn't know this. That's very unusual, Joanna.
Yeah, yes, exactly. In a drug trial, it's almost unheard of, because you select very healthy people, don't you?
Yes.
So there was a heart attack, there was a road traffic accident, and a number of other incidents like that. And there were 3 suicides, all in the esketamine group, all after, shortly after cessation of the esketamine. So quite probably associated with the down that you get following the high that you get with a recreational drug like esketamine. And I think the other thing it just highlights to me is the way that psychiatrists and researchers and drug companies are able to do this sort of doublespeak. So we know that ketamine is something that makes people high, puts people into an altered state that some people enjoy. Some people don't enjoy it, but some people enjoy it. Clearly, it's a recreational drug. But it's extraordinary how these researchers are able to talk about that high as an antidepressant effect. Which you would get with any, if you give someone heroin or cocaine and you measure you do a depression score a couple of hours later, of course you're going to show an antidepressant effect if that's how you want to talk about it.
That is the same thing that the criminal electroshock doctors do. I've read so many charts in regard to electroshock treatment when I've been in product liability suits. I'm still involved in big product liability suits here in the U.S., malpractice suits. The patient after one or two treatments tends to get euphoric from brain injury. It's brain damage euphoria. And the doctors write in the, always write a positive remark in the chart, such as mood elevated.
Yes. Yes.
Never do they write artificial high, euphoria, brain damage, we better stop the treatment. It's quite sick.
Sometimes they talk about tipping people into mania, don't they? They call it mania.
Yes.
Which is another way of sort of blaming the disease, blaming the condition, and enabling yourself to ignore the harmful effects of treatment. The other extraordinary thing about ECT and that euphoric effect, which I've seen several times in my practice as a doctor, it definitely occurs. I don't think it occurs with everyone, but it definitely does occur.
It tends to turn into apathy eventually. All brain damage, my experience, usually leads to apathy, not a permanent high.
Yes, absolutely. But as you say, immediately what you get is this state of euphoria, but it's a distinctive state of euphoria where people are sort of silly and disinhibited in ways it isn't quite the same as just, if you gave someone a big shot of cocaine or something. It's not just pure euphoria or high.
No, there's more injury in it. The memory is going. And
exactly, so it definitely occurs, but it's very difficult to find reference to it in the literature, isn't it, in the published literature?
Right. I found enough so that I've got it in my first book in 1979 on electroshock and in my papers. But you got to dig. You got to dig for
absolutely, yes. And very, very little recent acknowledgement. You have to go back a long way, don't you, when people were a bit more honest when they brought these things in.
Yeah. Well, before I wrote my shock book in 1979, they were very honest about how people thought they were dying on shock treatment. People had rebirth experiences and how people did it because they hated themselves. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. But once I started quoting them, they really cleaned up their published act, unfortunately. Joanna, can you say a little more? First, you're educating me marvelously and the audience about ketamine, and say some more about what is ketamine nearest to with drugs we're more familiar with?
So it's a strange drug. It's used as an anesthetic and it's a muscle relaxant. But it also seems to have a slightly stimulant properties and a slightly hallucinogenic quality to it. So people get this state. It's referred to in the literature as dissociation. So people get sort of, have this sort of out of body experience.
Yeah, which is considered in the DSM, of course, a mental disorder.
Yes,
It's actually very, very common, and a lot of people get it from stress or normally. So it causes a dissociative process.
Yes.
Where you're separate from yourself, your body, the world around you.
And people get sort of tunnel vision and really get, a bit like the sort of amphetamine the narrowing of focus with amphetamines, people get into, it's called a K-hole, get into this sort of tunnel vision where they're just focusing on, on not really oblivious to their surroundings and focusing on a bit of the floor or something like that.
That's
so
very, very, very helpful.
It's a strange drug. It's
addictive. I mean, we know it's addictive, right?
Yes. I mean, again, it's a bit like stimulants, I think, not so much like the opiates or benzodiazepines. So the come down is the main feature is this depression.
Crashing.
Crashing, of course, yeah.
It's a mixed sedative stimulant. It's an unusual drug. Very interesting. I think the verdict now has to be, and you'll see a good review of it in my book, Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal, that all classes of psychiatric drugs, probably all classes of psychoactive substances, will shrink brain tissue. They're neurotoxins. They poison nerve functions. And one of the first things to go are, unfortunately, our very highest centers.
Up to 60 million Americans are estimated to live with depression. Of them, 1 in 3 don't respond to available treatments. Enter this nasal spray. In what's considered the biggest breakthrough drug in the battle against depression since Prozac, the Food and Drug Administration this week approved the use of Ketamine, with the potential to deliver nearly immediate results.
A lot of the antidepressants that we're used to, such as Zoloft, Prozac, Lexapro, takes 4 to 6 weeks to work. Ketamine works in a week, and that's very exciting.
Marketed under the name Spravato, the spray is a derivative of the popular drug ketamine, popularly known in the 1980s as Special K.
That's right. Ketamine is now being prescribed to patients in the United States with treatment-resistant depression. These are patients who have tried all the different psychiatric medications that their psychiatrist has thrown at them, and they still feel depressed. So what are they going to do? They're going to take ketamine. You might think that I would be surprised by this, but I'm really not. Because I grew up in the 90s, I saw this transition from marijuana being seen as a party drug to marijuana being seen as a medicinal drug, something that can be prescribed to you by a doctor.
Americans everywhere are turning to cannabis, seeking relief from a wide range of ailments, including veterans like Sean Worsley, who uses cannabis to treat his post-traumatic stress disorder caused by combat in Iraq. Sean's medications for PTSD had troubling side effects, so he got a medical cannabis card.
Cannabis at a low dose can help reduce anxiety, relax someone, and individuals who have PTSD that newly initiate cannabis use report it being life-changing.
So this is partly not surprising to me because I've seen how this cultural shift has happened in the United States from seeing cannabis as a party drug to now having cannabis seen as a medicinal drug. But an additional reason why I am cynical about this and why it's not really surprising to me to find out that the FDA has approved ketamine for treating depression is because I've been reading a book lately called Anatomy of an Epidemic. I've gotten to learn about the history of psychiatric medications being prescribed in the United States. Reading this book has made me realize just how desperately people cling to ideas about drugs, that they really want them to work for them. They really want there to be some solution, some cure that they can take in a pill form, when their problems cannot be solved just by taking a pill. Millions of people are willing to take psychiatric medications with horrible side effects. Many people are willing to take medications that inflict brain damage on them for years in order to help with their depression. So to me, it's not surprising that people are now turning to ketamine to try to treat their depression. By reading some of the personal accounts in this book of people who have tried many different psychiatric medications and have struggled to come off the psychiatric medications once they've started them, I've come to realize that I was actually one of the lucky ones. I was prescribed Lexapro, I was prescribed an antidepressant medication, and I was able to stop taking it. I haven't been through this drug mill that so many people, millions of people have been through, where they try one medication and it doesn't work for them, they still feel depressed, and they have terrible side effects. So the doctor prescribes them either an additional medication or a different medication to try to find something that'll work for you. You just have to work to find the right one. You have to try different medications, and then one will work for you, one will click. But what happens when none of the psychiatric medications that a psychiatrist can prescribe to you work? What happens when your depression is still there, when you feel down still? Ketamine. Take ketamine. This is at epidemic levels. This is a terrible problem, and people are still resorting to anything that they can get their hands on to give themselves brain damage. It's just insanity. Just looking at some of the names on the cover of this book: Klonopin, Lamictal, Zyprexa, Wellbutrin, Prozac, Xanax. Oh, okay, so if these forms of brain damage haven't worked for you, maybe you should try this other one. It's called ketamine. Yeah, so you might have heard of ketamine. Some people joke around that it's a horse pill, that it's a horse tranquilizer. But no, this drug, it's been around a long time, but recently things have changed. They've had some new discoveries that this can cure your depression. Look, to me, I've heard this all before. I heard this with cannabis when I was growing up. Cannabis, I knew was a party drug. I knew it was something that people took recreationally. Then it turned into this medicinal drug that people said would cure their depression, would cure what ailed them. These are the compromises that people live with. In order to convince themselves that they're treating their depression, they'll put up with brain damage. They'll put up with horrible side effects just to feel better for a brief period of time, to feel something different. They might feel some euphoria in the short term, like Dr. Bregan says, that brain injury can induce euphoria briefly, but then over time it will just lead to apathy. So if those claims that I heard about cannabis helping with depression and anxiety were true, then why are people now resorting to ketamine? Cannabis was already the answer. Over the last 20 years, we've heard so much about the positive benefits of medicinal marijuana, right? So why do we need to have medicinal ketamine? Right. Probably because neither of those drugs actually cure depression. So what's next? If it's not cannabis, if it's not ketamine, what else is there?
Remember about 30 years ago, we had the first safe injection site here. And guess what? It was illegal. Just like it's illegal to give out safe drugs now. So you guys are following in the footsteps of a great tradition where you start doing something illegal and then it becomes legal. If Dolph and Van Du, with hardly any resources, can give away free and safe drugs, why can't governments that have billions in their budgets, all of the public health folks, everyone who knows anything about drugs, all of the people who use drugs, they say we need a safe supply. Not just a safe supply for a few hundred people, but a safe supply for everyone who wants it.
We are giving away more drugs. In these boxes are more drugs than these limits. We are still breaking the law because you know what? The law isn't helping us. We help us.